What's up, people, and welcome to another episode of Comics, Animations, and Movies. So today's episode is yet another Alita Battle Angel episode, and I probably won't make another one after this until we get to the movie, or unless the studio comes out with yet another really big new information, such as yet another big trailer. But what I wanted to do with this episode was go over all the information that we received from the past trailers. And I know a lot of the viewers have questioned, will this movie be faithful to the comic? And if there are any changes, will there be a dramatic change in either the story of the comic or in the overall look and feel of this entire franchise? And so what I wanted to do, I know in the previous episodes I've been kind of piecemeal looking into little areas and trying to figure out how faithful the story would be. But what I wanted to do with this episode was to actually really overall look at the story based upon the information that we've seen in the trailer, and whether we could actually create a story that will be faithful to the actual comic story, knowing that there are going to be some changes that we see in the trailer. Now, before we proceed, I do want to give my usual spoiler alert. Since we will be going over a lot of what we see in the trailer and comparing it to the overall story in the comic, I will be giving a lot of reveals that may actually give away a lot of the things that may come out in the movie. So if you have not read the first few volumes of Battle Angel Alita, and especially if you're really interested in wanting to go to see the movie fresh, then I would definitely suggest that you turn off this video, because we will be covering a lot of the things that are in the comic story, and from that speculating what we will actually see in the movie. So please, yes, if you are going to go see the movie and if you don't want to be spoiled from the comic story, please turn off this video. Also, I want to thank many of you commenters who provided a lot of background information and speculation with regards to the upcoming movie based upon the trailer and the comics, and they were really useful and revealing. And so thank you very much. I wouldn't be able to make this video without your input, so I really appreciated everybody's comments up till now, and I look forward to the comments coming from this particular video. Okay, so from the recent trailers, there is a lot of information that we can pull out with regards to this coming movie. And many of them are different from the comic. Some of them are quite similar to the comic. So I'll go over some of the key points. First, of course, is there is going to be some sort of raid by the Kunstler's on the space elevator. From what I figure, it seems like it's going to be a big battle. So the Kunstler battalion is probably just one of the attacking group, the special forces that probably will be sent in for infiltration. But in any case, that seems to be one specific scene coming out in the movie. Another one is with regards to the back alley fight that we see Grusica and those two other people come out. I apologize. I know you guys told me about what the names of those two other people were, and I've forgotten again by this time, so I apologize for that, but you know who I'm talking about. So those are with regards to those two back alley fights that we see in the comic. We also see that Vector is going to be the evil antagonist, the main antagonist. From what I hear, he's going to have a dual personality with Destinova being inside and possibly controlling Vector at certain times. From what it looks like and from what your comments have stated, and I agree with them, you notice that Vector's eyes glow blue, and then sometimes they don't. And so the indication is whenever his eyes are glowing blue, he's being controlled by Destinova. I think that's a good idea, and maybe that's why he wears the blade sort of shades that he has in the movie. Yeah, anyway, so other areas, we know that there's going to be quite a bit of Motorball. And originally, I thought that there was going to be one scene with regards to Motorball, but as I keep on looking at it, I think that there's going to be two separate scenes at least for Motorball. The first one, as many of you mentioned, it does look like she's wearing some sort of armor on top of her berserker body. And in certain locations, you notice this very much because her 99 number is actually hand-carved into the armor itself. Now, separately, there are also scenes where she has that purple Motorball body, the one that you see in the comics. And there you notice that it has a very nicely printed 99 on the actual body itself. So this indicates that she's wearing two separate bodies, and from what I could figure, there are two separate Motorball scenes. From what I could tell, the battle scene is going to be when she's wearing the armor and potentially the berserker body, which I think I agree with many of you that may be the case. And then the second is when she has that really fancy, shiny purple body. And what's interesting is when she's raising the Damascus blade, it's when she has the purple body. So what I figure is that that's going to happen after the actual battle scene, where she's using the hand-carved 99 armor plus the berserker body. Also, we do know that there's going to be a strong relationship story between Alita and Hugo, which of course parallels the Hugo arc in the comic. And I think that's going to be done faithfully. But one thing I do like about these trailers is the person who's playing Hugo, the gentleman's name is Kian Johnson, I think. He's doing a really good job. And to be honest, from the trailer, I really like the way Hugo's being portrayed here. Actually better than the comic. If you recall, in the comic, Hugo was kind of like a jerk. He wasn't particularly nice to Alita, and probably because he was the only young boy around Alita at that time, maybe Alita fell for him. I'm not exactly sure. She was in that psychological kind of naive and delicate time, and so maybe she fell for Hugo, although he wasn't particularly interesting character to fall for in the comic. Whereas here, what I see is a much more supportive Hugo to Alita, and considering the fact that Alita is again going to be in a very psychological, delicate state, this Hugo is very supportive of Alita, and I really like that. And there is something, I did say that I wasn't particularly happy with that comment with regards to Alita asking whether Hugo liked her, considering she wasn't completely human. And Hugo replied that, she was the most human person that he's ever met. Now it's starting to grow on me based upon some of the comments that you've all mentioned, but also based upon some of the speculations that I would like to make here. And it's with regards to how this movie can portray the irony of fate that we often see in the comic itself. Although this is actually not in the comic, but this will be something that can actually reflect how some of the things that you see in the comic, some of the look and feel in the comic can be portrayed with that comment. So I'll go over that later when I go over the speculation side. But anyway, I really do like this Hugo character, and I'm really looking forward to the actual relationship between Alita and Hugo. Now, the one thing that we see in the trailers that will indicate that it'll come out in the movie and was in the anime but not in the comic is, of course, the inclusion of Chiren, Jennifer Connelly's character. Now, of course, Chiren was in the anime and not in the actual comic. And there was a commenter in one of my previous videos who made a really interesting point with regards to the relationship between Chiren and Vector. Now, Vector in the comic was a much more complex character than the Vector in the anime. The Vector in the anime was a much more darker, kind of the antagonist character that we see in the trailers. But in the comic, he was a much more complex, a lot more conflicted character between good and evil. And the problem with, we all know what happens to Chiren at the very end. And it also looked like Chiren and Vector were lovers. And so the question that commenter brought out, which I very much agree, is if you're going to bring out a complex character like Vector from the comic, which was a much more preferred Vector than just the evil character that you saw in the anime, then it becomes a little bit conflicting to how somebody of Vector's character can take somebody like Chiren, who he loves supposedly from the anime, and give her the demise that she had at the very end of that anime. If he really loved Chiren, then he wouldn't have done what he did. And so, that action made it difficult because that seems very out of character to the comic book Vector, even if it might be in character to the anime Vector. And of course, since the anime Vector is much more shallow, that commenter said he doesn't want to see that, nasty anime evil Vector because that just, makes the story less interesting. And so with regards to the fact that now Vector is with Destinova, this may actually turn out quite interesting because we know what triggered Vector to do that in the anime. And if Destinova was the one that was controlling Vector, then that might turn out to be interesting. And so I will put it into the speculation part. I just wanted to explain here why I was going to speculate the way I did, based upon the comment that I can't remember who the commenter was, but thank you very much if you're watching this video. I thought that was very interesting. And once again, I think this will create a very interesting irony in life sort of situation, a really dark and ironic sort of situation that you often see in the Battle Angel comics, although this Chiren character never came out in the comic itself. And finally, one of the biggest changes we see from the trailer is the major animosity between Vector and Alita. You could see Vector hiring a bunch of hunter warriors. What it looks like is tasking a bunch of hunter warriors to go after Alita. Not Hugo, but Alita. And he, in fact, specifically says, I want you to go out and kill this girl named Alita. And so from whatever the case, at that time, as I mentioned, Vector shouldn't have known who Alita was. So what is this huge animosity between them? That's seen in the trailer, but what was not seen in the comic. And this is one of the reasons why this really bugged me for a while. And I wanted to think about a way, can you actually create a story rather than just piecemeal it, create a whole story that will indicate that there is some reason for all of these changes that you see. The greater amounts of Motorball, the high animosity between Vector and Alita, the reason for Vector to go after Alita, which he says is she is changing the natural order of things. Natural order of what things? There wasn't any change of natural orders of things in the comics. So what's he talking about? And all of these things. You also see Alita, as you see in this scene, where she is just alone going to see Vector. I presume that this is when she is infiltrating Vector's lair. And that in the comic, she went to Vector with Hugo. So why is she alone in this particular scene? So there are a lot of changes, and the biggest worry is that these changes are going to be significant enough to change the overall story or the look and feel of the story. So once again, my feeling was, instead of trying to figure out piecemeal, is there some way that this can be represented, I just wanted to come up with a situation where if you took all the things that you saw in the trailer, could you come up with a story that will still be more or less faithful to the overall story of Battle Angel Alita, and still come out with all of these changes that you actually see in the trailer? And so that's what I wanted to make this episode on. Sorry, once again, I needed to talk about a lot of things prior to this before actually doing the actual speculation. So based upon all of these changes that we see now, here is one possible storyline that you could actually create that will still be faithful to the Battle Angel Alita storyline, but still have all of these changes that we've seen from all of the trailers. So, sorry, I'm not really sure if this is how the movie will go, and this is not really, this is how the movie's going to be sort of thing. I'm just trying to create this situation where, again, can we take all of these things with the trailer and still feel comfortable that there may be ways that you could actually still be faithful to the comic story? So here is one possible scenario. So as we know, there's going to be a battle between the Kunzlers and a raid to the space elevator. So I feel that the movie will start with that. This will introduce, of course, the Alita warrior character to the viewers. And although this will destroy the slow reveal that we really enjoyed in the comic, I think this is a good idea because I don't think the mainstream movie viewers are going to be patient to enjoy that slow reveal. They're just going to think, tell me who Alita is, because, well, most people are too impatient to actually enjoy and appreciate the slow reveal. So I think what they're going to do is to give an initial information with regards to the battle, which will also not only give a intro to Alita, but also to the Kunzlers, as well as the demise of Zalem. Right? Why did Zalem end up that way? So whatever the case, we know that Alita doesn't particularly end up in the scrap heap directly due to that battle itself. However, it might be an interesting way to show it. And I got a feeling that maybe they'll go to the point where they show, Gelda and Lita, everybody running up the tube, and maybe it gets to a point where Gelda is screaming at Alita to keep going because she's the most important one in this mission. And then the whole thing blows up, and the viewers are left to wonder what happened to everybody, including Gelda and especially Alita. And then, of course, it pans out and then goes to 200 years later in Scrapyard City. Ito is walking around trying to look for interesting things to find in the scrap heap. And of course, she finds Alita. And that starts that entire story that we all know and love with regards to Battle Angel Alita. Whether you watch the anime or you read the comic, it's basically the same thing. And of course, Alita wakes up with absolutely no memory of her past. And of course, the story continues as we see in the comic or the anime. Both are basically parallel. But I got a feeling that maybe in this particular Alita, she will be a lot more emotionally frail than the Alita that came out in the comic. And that may be one of the reasons why many of you said, and I agree with you now, that if she was a lot more emotionally frail than the Alita in the comic, then she may at this point question her humanity. Is she real or is she a robot? Because she really can't relate to her existence at that time. This wasn't really a problem with Alita in the comic, but this may be an interesting way to bring Alita out, at least in the beginning. And that's important because of the way Hugo is now changed and why Hugo comes out in the beginning. Maybe Daisuke Ito, or Dyson Ito in this case, feels that Alita is so frail that she needs to have, some friends, and so he introduces Hugo. Hugo is a much more caring person in the movie than he is in the comic, and in this case, he becomes her emotional crutch at the very beginning of the movie. And between them, because he's such an emotional crutch and because he's such a supportive person, Alita starts falling for Hugo, which is a lot better reason than in the comic where she just, for whatever reason, just fell for Hugo, even though he was kind of a jerk to her. And so now he's continuously supporting her, and with Hugo's help, Alita starts becoming more and more confident about herself, more and more confident about her humanity. And we see even in that scene where he's talking about her, how Ito found Alita in the junk pile and says, she must be from Zalem. And she says she's an insignificant little girl. And again, Hugo's extremely supportive of Alita. And that's to cheer her up. Maybe somewhere along the way, because Hugo is such a big fan of Motorball, according to this movie, he says, hey, come on, let me show you something. And to cheer her up, he introduces her to Motorball. He tells her, this is the greatest sport in history. He absolutely loves it. Don't you think it's wonderful? And because Alita is so starstruck by Hugo, that she starts enjoying it as well. And what would be really interesting is if at that time, after showing all of this thing, he even shows who the champion of the Motorball arena is, which of course is Joshigan. It may not show a personality of that, but he will say, yeah, and the leader is Joshigan. And you know what my dream is? It's never going to happen, but someday I would really love to see if I could challenge Joshigan to a duel. I would probably be beaten down like crazy, and it's a crazy dream, but that would be something I would really love to see. And the reason for that, of course, I'll talk about later. But anyway, so then he introduces Alita to Motorball, and Alita starts going into Motorball more and more. As we know from the side stories of Alita Battle Angel, there are 4 levels of Motorball. The top level is the championship level that we see Alita in the actual Gunnm comic, or the Battle Angel Alita comic. But there are 3 lower levels of Motorball, and the lowest level is basically street Motorball, where, it's almost like amateur wannabes want to play Motorball, and it's the first entryway into Motorball, and if you could somehow become really good in that level, then you could climb up to the next levels. Well, if Hugo introduces Alita, of course, because of her Panzerkunst skills, she becomes seriously good at Motorball. And so now here comes the interesting twist. As we know, Vector mentions that Alita is going to be, she's making a problem to the natural order of things. And as I mentioned before, what natural order of thing is Alita becoming a problem for? Because in the Battle Angel Alita comic series, there was never anything indicative from Motorball to which Alita was becoming a problem. However, there is another specific comic that Yukito Kishiro wrote specifically on Motorball called Ashen Victor. And in that Motorball comic, he talks about a very interesting situation with regards to the entire Motorball industry that he doesn't talk about in Battle Angel Alita. And that is the usage of Axel and Atom. And these 2 drugs are performance drugs. One is a performance enhancer and one is a performance inhibitor. And these are supposed to be illegal drugs, but the syndicate, whatever controls the Motorball syndicate, actually uses these drugs. And the reason why they use these drugs is to actually game the system. The other thing they don't talk about in Battle Angel Alita, but they do talk about in Ashen Victor, is that there's an entire underground gambling network associated with Motorball. So people bet on the Motorball players the way people bet on horse races here. And the syndicate is gaming the system by using Axel and Atom on players such that they could actually make a significant amount of profit from gaming the system and knowing who will win. They would potentially put the Atom inhibitor on a favored player and put the Axel performance enhancer on the player that isn't favored, and then they would bet on the player that isn't favored and make a lot of money out of that. Well, what if in that world Alita started coming in and winning every Motorball contest? that will screw up the entire gaming industry. Gambling industry. And I bet that will make Vector seriously afraid, the Vector character. And so he would immediately start noticing Alita, and out of sheer fear of whoever is behind, controlling Vector, to blame Vector for this entire change in the industry, he might want to start changing things. Now, in addition to this, I want to thank all of you commenters, because many of you have said that it looks like Alita is using a suit that has the Berserker body underneath the armor. And if that's the case, Vector will be, keenly watching Alita due to this entire change in the natural order of the gaming industry or the gambling industry. And just because Nova happens to be behind in the subconscious of Vector, controlling Vector, and I got a feeling he's doing that because Vector is so monetarily powerful that he's basically utilizing that to gain whatever he needs, whatever materials he needs or whatever. And he notices, Nova notices the Berserker body, and we all know what happens when Nova notices the Berserker body. First thing he wants to do is to get his hands on the Berserker body. So now we have this Vector character who's seriously worried that Alita is going to destroy the entire gambling community, so he needs to do something about it. And we have Nova, who's like, God, I want to steal that body away from Alita. And that creates this entire situation where Vector now seems to want to get rid of Alita. Now, separately, I think the Hunter-Warrior thing is going to still go along. And I'm not sure if the Hunter-Warrior story will be associated with this, especially the Grusica arc. But somewhere along the way, of course, we know that Alita is going to fight Grusica, at least in the back alley in the beginning, when she has that porcelain body. And somewhere along the way later, Grusica is going to have the, the chainsaw body, chain blade body. And at that time, Alita still has the porcelain body, which indicates that she doesn't have the Berserker body yet. Maybe she does, but she hasn't donned it on yet. So maybe she's found it, given it to Ito, and says she wants to use it. I don't know. But in any case, in both cases, she fights Grusica. And by doing that, I think it triggers the Panzerkunst capability. We also know that by this time, Hugo is also with Alita, and so he witnesses how strong Alita is, and maybe that's why he's comfortable in bringing her into Motorball. Now, what we don't know is if Alita starts going and coming up the ranks of Motorball, will Hugo be enthusiastic and supportive, or will Hugo start getting jealous? And maybe it'll be a tinge of both. I hope it is, because that will give Hugo the complexity again, more than just, oh yeah, I want to be this really good guy for you. Because we also know that Hugo is a spine thief, so there is a dark side to Hugo, and so that conflict of the two characters will be interesting to see within the relationship between him and Alita. But I think he really honestly does care for Alita a lot, and that's why he's so supportive of her. Anyway, so now Vector needs to go after Alita, and but he can't really just go and kill her because of the fact that she is a registered Hunter-Warrior. If he did that, he would basically be a wanted criminal, and all the Hunter-Warriors will come after him. So there needs to be a way for him to be able to go after Alita. And the best way to go after Alita is, of course, through Hugo. So, of course, we know in the comic, Zapan just somehow out of sheer luck finds out that Hugo is the spine thief, and he goes after Hugo. But what if in this case we all know that Vector is actually the boss and customer for Hugo, and is contracting and purchasing all of the spines that Hugo steals? What if Vector actually tells that to Zapan, and just gives him a clue and tells him to go after Hugo because he thinks he's a spine thief. So Zapan goes after Hugo and finds out that Hugo is a spine thief through Vector, and by doing so, now Hugo becomes a wanted criminal. At that point, of course, Alita becomes extremely conflicted because of the fact that she cares for Hugo so much, but she is a hunter warrior, just like in the comic, and so she goes to confront Hugo, and that gives the really long discussion of exactly what happened to Hugo and the backstory of Hugo, which is seriously important. They better not leave that out in the movie. And because of that backstory and everything, and how much she cares for Hugo, she decides to forego the hunter-warrior side and to help Hugo out. Now, in the meantime, all the hunter-warriors are going after Hugo, and within there, I presume that there are a few hunter-warriors who would rather work under Vector. They're maybe getting paid under the counter by Vector, and so those people who are hired by Vector are told to use this opportunity to go kill Alita. Pretend that you're going after Hugo, but just while you're going after Hugo, just happen to kill Alita at the same time. And this would, of course, result in a lot of hunter warriors going after Alita, as we see in the scene. Now, somewhere along the way, Zapan meets up with Hugo and fights with Hugo. And here is a part I'm not really sure about, but there's two ways it could go. I'll only talk about one way. There may be some big battle that goes along, and eventually Alita may temporarily defeat Zapan, but Hugo somehow gets kidnapped and sent to Vector. And at that point, Vector's basically taunting Alita, you come over here and let us destroy you so that you could let Hugo live. And that will then give a reason for Alita to then infiltrate Hugo's lair without Hugo, because of course Hugo's kidnapped. She's going after Vector because she needs to rescue Hugo. And so that has that entire scene of her infiltrating the Vector's headquarters. And it results in the scene that we see in the comic as well as the anime, where Hugo, now after he's been rescued by Alita, confronts Vector and asks him, I believed in you. I trusted you. What happened? Why did you betray me? I needed to go to Salem so much, And this, of course, results in Vector giving that famous speech to Hugo in both the comic and the anime about how he planned to send Hugo up to Salem, of course, in pieces after he harvests Hugo's organs. And of course, this devastates Hugo and enrages Alita, and because of that, Vector releases his final mech that he has, just like he did in the anime, and it results in one final battle. Not only does Alita defeat the mechs, but of course, she beats the crap out of Vector, to the point where he's paralyzed from the waist down. But unfortunately, in the combat, Hugo gets critically injured, and Alita has to rescue him and take him back, the same way she did in the comics and the animes, by putting her life support system on whatever torso he has left, And she also notices that something has happened to Vector. His personality has completely changed. His eyes have stopped glowing blue. And Vector kind of almost looks like he's just woken up, and looks at Alita and goes, who the heck are you? And of course, Alita's like, what are you talking about? And Vector looks around and realizes what has happened, realizes his state, and starts screaming. And that fear, that bewilderment, is very familiar to Alita, because that was something Alita felt when she first woke up at the beginning of the movie. And so she's starting to think like there's something wrong with Vector. This Vector that she sees now is different from the Vector that she was fighting up to this point, so she decides to spare him. But not until she tells him that if she ever finds out that he was lying, then she will come back to finish the job, and she leaves him in that state. Then on the way back, the surviving Zapan, who was the one maybe that kidnapped Hugo and took him to Vector and then left for a while, comes back to try to steal the remaining torso, Hugo's remaining torso. And of course, things go the same way as in the comic and in the anime, in that gives Alita the excuse to destroy Zapan because of the fact that it looks like Zapan is stealing Alita's bounty, and this in turn labels Zapan as a criminal. So of course after that, everything goes as you expect from the comic. But what's interesting is, of course, in the beginning, it was Hugo who told Alita that despite her cyber body, she was the most human person that he's ever met. And I presume that he was honest about it, but now he's, of course, gone completely insane. And he's completely, torn down by all the events. Not just that he lost his body, but also his dream with regards to going to, Zalem has disappeared. He's considered a criminal. Everything has now piled up and he has gone completely insane. And of course, it's at that point that now things have switched over. It's Alita who's now the supporting character, who's trying to calm Hugo down and telling him, of course, despite what happens to him with regards to his body and what happens to him with regards to how society sees him, she will always be there for him, and she will always believe that he is the most humane person she has ever met. But as a twist of irony and, because of all this pain and rage that is pent up in Hugo, he lashes back at the one person he cares for the most, which is Alita, by telling her, "What the heck do you know? You're just a freaking robot," which of course stabs Alita right in the heart. But of course, Alita knows that Hugo's not, of right of mind, and, with tears running down her eyes, she starts telling him, stop it, this is not you. Please, you could get over this. And of course, she holds on to Hugo, which somehow calms him down for a little bit, And then, of course, that then eventually leads to the famous climax of the Hugo arc, in which case, of course, at the very last minute, Hugo tells Alita that he loved her and it was so great that he had a chance to meet her. And of course, then everything moves on. This gives Alita the reason to now move to Motorball because, of course, that was Hugo's favorite sport. She's already a fairly well-known Motorball player, so this wouldn't be a unusual reason for her to go to Motorball as it was in the comics, where we're asking, why did Alita know about Motorball in the first place? Even Daisuke Ito didn't know anything about Motorball until Shumira showed it to him, So why would Alita know? Here, of course, since Hugo introduced Motorball to Alita, and since she's already climbing up, if she was going to leave the Hunter-Warrior world, then that would be the best place for her to go. But there's also another reason. Since it was Hugo's dream to eventually somehow be able to rise up in the Motorball, sports world and get a chance to challenge the champion, which of course is Jashigan, that has become Alita's own goal now. And what I'm hoping for is at the very end, when they introduce Alita again, Alita will come out, basically raise that Damascus blade with her new body, her new shiny Motorball body, look up and say, "Look after me, Hugo. This one's for you," and basically, go off into the first match. And I think something like that would be a nice way to end the movie. I forgot one last thing with regards to Vector. We left him basically paralyzed and bewildered on what's going on. And in the last sense of irony or scene of irony, as we talked about before, the disconnect in the anime with regards to how Vector loved Chiren, and yet the demise of Chiren was so violent. How could Vector do that to Chiren? Now, if Vector was Nova, then I could see him doing that to Chiren just out of curiosity to see how Vector would react. And of course, once Vector comes back and looks around, trying to somehow, survive and recover, sees what he's done to Chiren, and just scream out in mental anguish, and that we leave Vector in that state in the movie. And that would, of course, be another sort of dark irony that we often see in Battle Angel Alita. So although this isn't the way the comic goes, or this isn't the way the anime goes, this will be a really nice way to show how the movie, in a new light, can still bring out the look and feel of the comic and the anime. Anyway, so that's about it. I just wanted to make this particular episode just because of the fact that I wanted to see if there was a way that you could still have all these different changes that we see and still be faithful to the movie. I just wanted to see that there may be possibilities of course, the producers not only being faithful to the comic, but in certain areas possibly improving upon some of the places where the comic fell short. Yeah, I'm still looking forward to the movie. I don't know if it'll go this way. I don't really care if it goes this way. This is just my particular hypothesis to feel more comfortable that there are ways to actually still remain faithful to the comic and have a different sort of movie. And so long as they do it in their way and remain faithful and possibly improve upon certain points where the comic fell short, I would think that it would become a really good movie. So that's about it. Thank you very much. Tell me, how would you feel? How do you feel with regards to the recent changes that we see in the trailer? The recent scenes that we see are faithful to the comic in the trailer? Do you feel that there will be major changes? And do you feel that you still feel comfortable that even with the changes, the producers will be able to create a faithful storyline? And as always, I thank you all for your comments, because your comments are phenomenal. You guys are a lot more knowledge than me in Battle Angel Alita, and I really appreciate the comments and the information that you guys give, because this clarifies a lot more with regards to how I feel about the movie and, of course, how I feel about the comics. So once again, thank you very much. And with that said, yes, that's the end of this episode. I don't know if I'll make another Battle Angel Alita episode in the near future. But if I do, well, until then, happy comic book reading, happy anime watching, happy movie watching, and of course, Jaya, nice day, everyone.